Part 2. But I started sensing the lingering word with which I had become well accustomed. You want to reach the masses. The man said, you want not only to create music, but for it to be heard and appreciated. For thousands upon thousands of people to tell you that you have changed their lives. That'll fix you, won't it, Fen? That'll make you feel like more than a drop in a large pool. My face whitened as Heath's scanning eyes passed over my brain, tugging at the strands of my innermost insecurities. The crooked man knocked and bruised a few nerves as he searched. But you won't be a person to them, Heath warned, pupils nearly vanishing as they rolled closer to the edges of his eyelids. They won't see Fen, the young man who just wanted the world to hear his art. They'll see something that belongs to them, the one who gives songs that speak to their experiences, love, loss, and the passage of time. Whatever words you spill into their ears will not tell the tales of Fen Davies, but the tales of his followers. Later, I would feel a pang of fear, wondering how Heath had known my surname. But later than that, following the most hellish week of my life, I would not wonder at all, and it would not terrify me to the same extent as the other happenings. While sitting in the studio's lobby, I was focusing only on the glistening contract in my lap. It outshone Heather's glaring words of caution. My dream was about to come true. To be heard was all I'd ever wanted. It wasn't about the money. My parents would have fainted at such an admission, but I was fine with the theater's generous offering of minimum wage. It was always about fame. I wanted to be on stage. I wanted thousands of people to sing my songs, and I wanted to sign that contract without even consulting a lawyer, but I managed to restrain myself. May I have a digital version of this? I asked. I want to send it to my friend. He doesn't work in the music industry, but he's a legal expert, I think. This is time-sensitive, Fen, Heath interjected, the veins at the bottom of his eyeballs starting to peek at me. He's clearly been bumping something, I thought, but I don't give a shit. If a manager needs to be as high as a kite to even consider signing me, then let the blow flow. You're really going to rush me? I asked. The man paused, clearly searching for a lie. I'm old-fashioned, Fen. I've never been one for technology, and the industry is fast-moving. You know, this technology is a big part of the modern music industry. I pointed out the old ways still work. Heath grumbled. I sighed. Let me give my friend a call. At least, this is a very brief contract. I'll read it to him. Heath was about to say something, but he reconsidered fine. With trembling fingers, I hurriedly dialed Paul, my former bandmate and dear friend. I was thankful that he picked up. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. That's a lie, of course. I would have signed the contract without any legal consultation at all. Hey, Fanny Paul answered. What's up? I'm about to head into a meeting. You're having one right now. I chuckled. Let me read you a contract. It'll only take a minute, I beg your pardon. My friend asked a contract for what I read the document aloud, hoping that it would serve as both an explanation and a pleasant surprise for one of my closest friends. His reaction was the one I'd expected. Jesus. Fen. He paused. You jammy dodger. Well done. At least one of us sees the dream, eh? I laughed. It's crazy, isn't it? What do you think? He sighed. I mean, I'm happy that you finally caught the eye of a label, but look, this is a strange one. It's an incredibly short contract. There are so many things this company hasn't stipulated. Have you even researched Red and Tinny Records? No, I replied. It's sort of a time-sensitive thing. That's a red flag in itself, Fen Paul warned. I just want to know whether or not the contract ticks all of the boxes, I said. Does anything sound fishy? I'd prefer to see it written down. Paul said I accept the result of that success. This is the sentence which sticks out like a sore thumb. From a legal standpoint, I asked. No, Paul admitted. But time is ticking, Mr. Davies. Heath warned. Is that him? Paul asked. Is this guy sitting there and waiting for you to make a decision? You're being pressured, Fen. I don't like any of it. Is it a sound contract, Paul? I asked again. My friend mumbled something incoherently, but he eventually released a sigh. It's legally dubious, but not necessarily illegal. He said, however, you should be alarmed by the very fact that I remember every word of the contract. It shouldn't be that short. I finished, I know, but I have to sign it, Paul. You know I do. Paul moaned uncomfortably. I'm not saying any of this as a lawyer, Fen. I'm saying it as your friend. This is one of the least trustworthy contracts I've ever come across. The whole thing smells, and I just Googled the name of the label. I didn't find any mention of. Technology is noise. We don't have an online presence, Heath interrupted, his keen ears having somehow heard my friend's voice through the receiver. I think I'd like a decision now. Fen, I'm doing it, I whispered, hanging up the phone before Paul had another chance to protest. I knew my friend was right. I'd known it before ringing, knowing it the second I locked eyes with the strange man, whose form looked less and less human with every passing moment. But every jolt of dread was counteracted by a fresh surge of endorphins. I kept envisioning my new life, the one I'd been chasing for a decade, and I did what I was always going to do. I scribbled my name and the date on the contract. Then I thrust it back into Heath's hands. The man smiled, rolled off the edge of the chair, then stood with the hunch in his back, seeming to worsen. I hope this finds you, Heath whispered ominously before passing through the revolving door. That very same evening, Before I'd done a thing, the growth began. My follower count on each social platform rose into the thousands, driven by some marketing scheme I hadn't even seen unfold. But I wasn't complaining. I was happy to let Heath work his magic, happy to let him keep his secrets, given that there were results on day one. The following morning, I received a thin, brown parcel in the post. Inside was a packaged version of my unofficially released debut album, The Land, which had been collecting dust on SoundCloud for years. The vinyl sleeve depicted a sprawling forest of fir trees which stretched beyond the horizon. I also found a slip of paper at the bottom of the brown parcel, signed below Mr. Fen Davies. If you grant Red and Tinny Records the authority to officially release your debut album on Friday, 3rd November 2023. I signed my name without bothering to call Paul and endure another lecture. I posted the letter immediately, but wondered how it would even arrive in time for Mr. Heath Brandon to release my album the following day. It was only later, upon admiring the mock-up vinyl of my album for a second time, that my opinion started to shift, that the sky-scraping trees took on new life. The artwork was still striking, but it struck me with dread, not wonder. And the longer I eyed the landscape, the more I felt threatened by the watching woodland. The more I imagined in the darkened recesses of the forest, eyeballs rolling into skulls, yet still somehow seeing me, I flipped the vinyl sleeve over, not wanting to tarnish this exciting day, the day that I hoped would precede my meteoric rise to fame. I predicted, of course, a modest start. Whatever promotional campaign Heath had planned, I expected my subscriber count on YouTube to reach several thousand, and I was excited for that. I was prepared for that. Nothing more, but there was much more. I woke on Friday morning with a heavy rattling head, a wallet loaded with loose change, the groggy sensation that follows a restless night. Giddy anticipation had kept me fidgeting in bed, and if I'd known that The Land was scheduled for a midnight release, I wouldn't have slept at all. I would have been glued to social media as the unprecedented whirlwind began. Instead, I unlocked my phone around 10 in the morning to find a storm that had already been raging for hours. What the fuck, Fen? I just listened to The Land. I'm sorry for being an arse. If I'd known you were sitting on such a gem, I'd have been screaming at you to sign the contract. You're incredible. 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 I beamed happily at the message from Paul, though I was simultaneously irritated that he hadn't been quite so mesmerized by The Land when I finished it 3 years earlier. The music was the same, only my status had changed. Still, that thought quickly drowned in an avalanche of noise. A staggering number eyeballed me from the bottom of my screen. Atop the YouTube app was a red, bloated notification bubble, presenting an integer that seemed to be a glitch 46,568, heart squirming on my tongue. I hurriedly scrambled to check my channel. The notifications were real. I had 3,170 subscribers on Thursday evening. By 10:20 a.m. on Friday morning, I had 259,679 subscribers. My videos had views in the hundreds of thousands, and the Spotify streaming figures were just as mind-melting. I received mentions on social media from everyone I knew and nearly everyone I didn't know. Mr. Lewis called me apologetically, begging for me to sign with his label. I declined. I didn't need him. My social media accounts had skyrocketed in traction, even the ones I'd abandoned years earlier, and this was only the beginning. Friday, 3rd November 2023, by the evening of the following Friday, nobody would know my name. I begged for them to forget Heath, and I only corresponded by post, and there was a frequent stream of letters, back and forth. I sent each response to the following address: RTR Building 11th Street, Lancashire PR11, PR11. It is a non-existent place, as you'll see if you Google the address, but my letters were clearly being delivered because I was receiving responses from Heath. On Monday morning, I caught the Royal Mail driver at the post box. I asked him how he'd managed to deliver my letters to a location that did not exist, but the postal worker simply offered a frown. The puzzled man told me that he didn't recall seeing any letters addressed to such a place. The postcode, he said, obviously did not exist. There returned that scraping churn in my gut, much like the one I'd felt when Heath Brandon's pupils spun towards the abyss behind his eyelids. Yet again, however, dopamine drowned my fear. I was thrilled about the idea of my first real gig on Tuesday, 7th of November, the O2 Ritz in Manchester, an old, well-known venue, but a small one. A good starting spring towards the rather more intimidating concerts. That was why I was so unprepared for the crowd outside the venue. Fans blocked the road as my chauffeur attempted to safely ferry me towards the side entrance, and the vast majority of these people, I quickly realized, weren't even in the queue. These were folk who hadn't managed to gain tickets to a sold-out show. The folk behind my sudden rise to success. Something baffling dawned on me. The Ritz can house nearly 2,000 people, but I'd already outgrown it. I was scheduled to perform at Wembley Stadium that Friday. Heath had promised great things, but this was beyond all I knew to be possible. It was an unprecedented rate of growth, and this scene made that apparent to me. Whitworth Street West was buried beneath an army. Whatever their goal, that was how the fans appeared to me. Militant, motivated, appreciated. I'd spent the weekend enjoying fame from a distance, and that car ride was my first graze with the outer world as a famous man. 3 million subscribers on YouTube after only 6 days of fame. Seeing those numbers on a screen had been intoxicating, but I hadn't mentally braced myself to see even a fraction of that number in the flesh. Not digits on my phone, but real people. A hungering, mindless mob surrounding my car and banging eagerly on its metalwork. They were obstructing any potential route from my vehicle to the Ritz. The gathering was disrupting the flow of traffic, though no authorities seemed to care. Even the staff members in luminous jackets, who should have been dispersing the disruptors or calling the police, were clamoring to peek inside my car, cupping hands against the tinted panes and scanning me with eyes that offered no insight into their cold thoughts. They were worryingly fixated upon me, the man who had been a nobody to them only a handful of days earlier. "Are we going to be able to reach the entrance?" I asked Ian, the chauffeur. When I turned to face him, however, I was horrified to find that the man was already staring at me, mouth grinning, eyes on the verge of watering. Throughout the drive, long before we'd even reached Whitworth Street West, I'd viewed him as a poor driver, speeding and swerving, nearly colliding with curbs and cars, but I realized I'd simply been avoiding the truth I'd seen in my peripheral vision. Ian had been driving terribly because he was repeatedly taking glances at me. "I'm a huge fan, Fen," the chauffeur whispered. I smiled, striving to look at anything but his possessed eyes. I locked onto his smile instead, but those curled lips perturbed me. Much like the members of the mob who'd surrounded us, the driver was hungry. Dribble had trickled from his lips and coagulated in his facial hair, a sign that, as I'd feared, he'd been eyeing me in this way since the start of the journey. "Thank you, Ian," I replied nervously. "Anyway, how am I going to get inside the venue?" A tear escaped the driver's left eye, revealing something that told a different story from the one painted across his smiling face, a face that was practically quaking with ecstasy. "I'll dispose of them," he choked, as if gasping for air. Then Ian unexpectedly birthed something through the narrow canal of his compressed lips. I'd never been so haunted by the mere sight of a tongue's tip, but it told a dreadful story. The snake moved almost imperceptibly from one side to the other, not quite licking lips, not quite doing anything human. It retreated to the depths of mystery behind the man's terrifying smile, and there followed a moment of stillness. I screamed when Ian slammed his foot onto the accelerator. He refused to avert his gaze from me as our vehicle tore forwards. The crowd scrambled to part down the middle, creating a safe passage for us. I closed my eyes and slammed my hands against my ears to mute the terrifying clunks of bodies falling off the bonnet. What horrified me more than the driver's series of near murders, however, was the unaffected temperament of the crowd. The injured fans did not shriek, but continued to squeal excitably.